Hi, it's Larry Kaul from Change Agent Board. I'm here today with Rob Green, who is a founder and managing director of a consultancy called WorksMachine. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Thank you.
So Rob has a lot of expertise in an area that we're very interested in, and we've created this series, as many of you know, called Avoiding Common Business Owner Mistakes. And this is a big part of what Rob's built his career around. So what we want to talk a little bit about today is how to avoid letting your business fail. That's one of his areas of passion and interest. Rob, you want to tell everybody a little bit about what Works Machine is all about before we get into everything?
Sure. And thanks for having me. And hopefully, I can help a few people and share some knowledge. So, WorksMachine was founded by myself and another partner. We've been in big companies, small companies, startups. We've invested in them. We've been worked with investment teams, and over the course of time, we started to see kind of some patterns about why things don't go right, and it's hard to make everything go right. And so Works Machine was really founded to take and let me add, our background is B2B technology. So if you make, if you're an apple farmer, probably can't help you too much. Um, but anyway, the point is we formed a firm to help companies that are in the maybe $5 to $50 million range get themselves in a place where they can exit or get additional funding or get their first round of funding. And that's really what we do. So we go in and help a company kind of shore everything up, get the story right, get them marching in the right direction, explain how to get to an exit or get funding, and then we're done. That's our job.
And how did you get into this? What was the motivation for taking this direction?
Yeah, I've been an advisor maybe 20 times, and in technology, it's pretty common if you have had some success that somebody will ask you to be an advisor, and they'll give you a half a point or a point of stock in the company. And I found that I rarely, if ever, made money doing that. And because you don't have any control, you're just an advisor. And I would give advice, and then people wouldn't do that, and then the company would fail. And so I got kind of frustrated doing that. Number one, it wasn't a good use of my time. Number two, I felt like there were things people could have done, which was the point of me being an advisor, that would have potentially helped them. And so the consultancy was really started just from the standpoint of, look, we'll get paid. We don't want your equity, and if you work with us, you have a much better chance of being successful. And if you don't want to, we still get paid, frankly, and that's that. So that's really where it came from.
And how did you get into technology? Where did you start out?
Mhm.
What was your initial kind of?
Sure. I got out of school in 1987. I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something with technology, whatever that meant. And I started out in telephony, and I was in telephony for about 6 years. And then I really was more interested in software. So I ended up going to a little software company, which is basically a turnaround. And software in particular has its own little world of problems, right? I'm sure every industry does. And excuse me. And so I I turned this company around, and it was really interesting what they did, but they kind of missed their window of opportunity. And I ended up going to Microsoft because I knew client server technology and I was interested in media, and that was a super amazing education. It was right at the beginning of digital media, and I was one of the people that vetted companies that would come to us to do technology deals. So I looked at hundreds of companies, and companies, many companies people in your audience will know. They would come through the door. Often their claims were not supportable. Sometimes they were. We would do different deals with them, and it was really fun. And I wanted to learn more about M&A. We did a lot of investments from Microsoft in this area, but it wasn't from the sell side, it was from the buy side. So I went to a partner company that we sold. It was a pretty big transaction, and then I ended up running a company that I sold, and then another one, and that sort of filled out kind of what I was interested in.
What's really interesting to me about what you said is the breadth of the experience. So you've sat in the seat that your clients are sitting in. So you have experience with
Yeah,
what they're actually going through. You don't get that at Microsoft. But then from the
not
perspective of
really.
Microsoft, you were able to see the broader universe of what was going on across a number of different types of companies. Can you talk a little bit about the value that experience brings? How are you seeing things maybe
Well,
in a company?
sure. I mean, and just, I mean, the one thing is, I really believe that a lot of learning happens at inflection points for transitions, right? For technology transitions. And the reason for that is that there's a lot of innovation that happens, and you see a lot of people making bets on companies. So, I've really always looked for those inflection points. That's kind of the fun part. So when I was in telephony, it was only a couple of years after divestiture, and there were thousands of telecom companies. And ultimately, I decided that business was just a capital intensive business that drove the price down. Nothing wrong with that, but at the end of the day, um, the technology was, in my opinion, I felt subservient to the capital requirements, right? And so now we have, three cell phone companies. When I was at Microsoft again, it was right at the beginning of digital media, and I really loved that space. Um, and nothing was really figured out, right? There were no standardized codecs for internet consumption anyway. There weren't uh, existing revenue models like you see today. It was all a big guessing game that was up for grabs. And the consequence of that is I saw hundreds of companies, many companies. That's really where you have enough of a pool to see trends. So if it's an existing technology space, the investments have been done, the big bets typically, and sure you might see a couple of companies, but when it's early, the investments haven't all been done, and you start to be able to see enough companies that you can identify some trends in those companies. That to me is exciting.
So as you're looking into a particular situation and trying to understand what's going on with that business, how do you approach that?
So when you're looking for the team to what the team is doing and how many team members they have, um, um, where they're actually at with the technology, um, then you start to be able to see where there's probably going to be some problems. Uh, another example is if they just simply don't have enough money, or if the technology claims are so big, then I really put my skeptics hat on. Most technology changes are pretty iterative, right? And it's very rare that something is truly completely upends an industry. I think there were 11 at least search engines before Google. Google just worked better. So I'm a skeptic first, and I sort of have this laundry list in my head that I check off. Team, that's a throwaway term. Everybody talks about how important team is, but the reality is, if you don't have the right team, and more importantly, the right management structure, it's difficult to be successful. If they don't have enough money, they don't have the story right to go raise the money. If they think they're going to raise money in 2 months, if the product is three people, but it's going to completely, supposedly change the world in a way that no one else has thought of it, then I put my skeptic's hat on and sort of assess it from there.
So you mentioned team. How do I know that I have the right team?
Well, that's a good question. Everybody's different. I mean, their management style. But personally, I think that in technology, you just literally need smart people to start with, and that's probably sounds a little biased, but I think it's true. I mean, these are complex products typically. Everybody doesn't have to be an engineer, but they're complex products, and they fit into complex eco structures. And you really can't go wrong. There's a saying in NASCAR, we can work with speed, meaning if somebody's a great driver and maybe they crash or something, you're better off still starting with a really great driver. So, you need brain power. Secondly, um, from my perspective, I really think that you have to have an engineering structure where someone separate from engineering is setting the schedule for product delivery. I've never seen it work where the engineers are also setting the schedule. It just doesn't, it's just no disrespect to all my engineering friends, but they'll tell you this, right? They tend to lean towards the very optimistic side of things, and you need someone else to manage that schedule. Those are important things that help the company scale ultimately, because you have to be able to get products that ship and that work. And so undervaluing the amount of time you need to test, having engineering set schedules and maintain them, and feature requests and things like that, I don't see that as being a very good way to scale a company. It works when there's 3 of you. It doesn't work when there's 25 of you. Personally, I'm not a micromanager. Some people are. I think that's hard to scale a company if you're really a micromanager. I think it works better if you hire smart people and have them quantify what they're going to do within the job, and then manage them to their own goals, and hold them accountable in that way, rather than setting goals for people. So at the end of the day, if somebody's super task oriented, they probably need to work for a bigger company. If they're in a high growth mode, they're going to need to be a little bit entrepreneurial, be able to manage themselves and work within a team. That's my long answer.
So as a company owner, I often know something's right, not quite right, but I don't have enough perspective to understand what's going on and what to do about it, because perhaps I've only been through it once, where it's somebody like you, you've seen that hundreds of times. You've seen exactly the same thing hundreds of times. How do I go about diagnosing myself to understand what my problems are?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. The problem could be you.
It usually is, isn't it?
I'm a warrior, right? I worry about things all the time. And I think that there's kind of always something that's not right. It's just the nature of companies and people and everything else. Of course, there's something that's not right. The question is, first of all, is it not right enough to bother taking up your time, or can you let it rest and worry about something else? Because you can't fight every fire all the time. You really got to kind of pick and choose. And then in terms of diagnosing that, I mean, you really have to have some good critical thinking skills that you can apply. And most importantly, the dialogue you have with your team is what helps suss that out. So, there's no magic font of information that somebody can tap into. That font is your team and your own critical thinking skills, and then weighing out the value of what you're going to attack and what you're going to let lay for a while.
So what I've heard you say is that you've got to have a good, smart group of people, and you have to have realistic expectations about what your technology is going to be able to do, that it's iterative in an environment where people are already working. You have to have the ability to get funding at some point. You want to talk a little bit about that and that piece of this?
Sure. Well, let me back up and say one thing that's really important. The only thing that really matters is growing the company. It's not like that's not really a separate goal from making sure you have the right team and funding. All those things are just sort of a foundational piece to grow the company. So oftentimes people get too fixated on the technology, for example. Nothing sells itself. And so you really have to be driving everything towards the singular goal of increasing revenue. And that clarifies everything else you're working on, right? It really helps drive home this point of, is this going to add more revenue or not? Instead of being sucked into, oh, we need employee performance reviews, and that'll somehow help us. Yeah, maybe, but is it really the same value as selling a big account? No way. So you put the team, the money, the product, that's the foundational layer under the company that you're going to build everything on top of. Everything that those foundational pieces relate to should be related to driving more revenue. I've got an investor buddy of mine who's done really well, and He goes, Rob, as I got older, he goes, I thought to myself, you know what? Revenue solves a lot of problems. And that really stuck with me. And it's true. So making amazing technology that nobody buys is not that valuable. Making amazing technology that grows the company 100% year over year, very valuable. Okay, and I think you were asking me about raising money. Is that right?
Well, let's pass on that for now, because I think you went in a different direction, and it's a good one. We should talk about it. Revenue's not easy. So if I'm a, I've got a couple of engineering friends, and I'm really smart, and they're really smart, and we've got a great idea, and we know what we're doing. Maybe there's an MBA in the room. It's got some good street skills as well. How do you translate that into the sales part and getting that revenue going?
I tend to look at things in terms of where is my sweet spot going to be for my accounts, and where does that relate to? What I mean by that is, sure, there's your super huge accounts, right? Oftentimes, what happens is those could be a huge chunk of your revenue and like all of your time. So they're not really great to have early a lot of times. They tend to come with loads of feature requests, and it's sort of like making one big bet, and sometimes a big account can kill a business. On the other hand, loads of little tiny accounts, yeah, they put a little revenue in the pot, but you can't really scale off them. So you're going to find your sweet spot, and that can take some time. If the company's established, let's go with the premise that they're already doing 5 million or something like that, but they're not really growing. There's can be a lot of reasons why that's the case. Many reasons. Often in a technology firm, it's because the founder, again, with all due respect to engineers, is an engineer, and they kind of have this mentality that they build a better mousetrap and the world's going to be a path to your door. Not true. Many people don't realize, sales, you watch a movie on TV, it's some guys having dinner and drinks, and then magically something gets signed. Okay, in the real world, 95% of the work to that moment went in prior. And it's pretty hard work, right? It's cold calling people, it's chasing down leads, it's getting referrals, it's getting meetings, it's getting turned down for meetings. And that's not really the fun part of the sales job, right? The fun part is getting the deal. And those take time. So one of the things you can look at is, what is the average time it realistically takes to close a bread and butter account sale? And what are the resources that need to be there? And that kind of tells you what the budget for that's going to be, and what it's going to take to scale that. And so then over time, once you kind of figure that out and you march to that, the bread and butter accounts, then yeah, if you get a little one, fine. You get a consistent cadence going. You understand how big your funnel needs to be. And over time, you start to chip away at maybe a marquee account, which could take 36 months to land. And then, once you kind of get that momentum going, you can keep dumping gas on the fire, and it goes great. But that's really what you have to do to start out is figure out that bread and butter piece, and then figure out the mechanics behind that, and then manage to that.
So for these smaller technology companies that get to a certain level and then tend to get stuck, they've got to figure out the revenue problem.
If the management, let me be blunt, often what happens is, and this is where things go sideways, is you really have somebody that is sort of at the end of their management capabilities and is maybe perhaps happy running a lifestyle company, which there's nothing wrong with that. The only time there's only two times that really doesn't work. One, where they've got outside investors who want to get paid and which aren't interested in supporting a lifestyle company. Two, if the company's burning money. And actually the third one, and a third is if the person or persons that are running the company think they have greater aspirations, but don't recognize their own limitations, right? And that's often really what holds companies back. Well, once you bring in institutional outside investors, in particular VCs or whatever, they have an expectation that the company's going to grow rapidly, and definitely positively not interested in the lifestyle business.
If I'm running a company and I know I want it to grow, it's not a lifestyle business. I'm ready to go. What you're saying first is I've got to understand my sweet spot. So chase the
Yep.
right clients. Get a list together, understand them, maybe do some persona identification.
Think through where your product maps to in the market, right? There's usually somebody that's selling something super expensive that has many more features and somebody selling something cheaper, or maybe you're one of the other sides of that. But think through where your product maps most effectively.
So you find your fit of where you can win. Once you know that direction, then how would you recommend? What's the next step?
Once you kind of have figured that out, well, then if you're really thinking through what that market looks like, it could force you to change aspects of your company, right? It might be that sweet spot is not that big of a market, or it might be that the sweet spot is a big market, but the sales cycle's 3 times longer than you expected, in which case you need more money. It might be that you need a different type of salesperson selling it. You really have to understand where your product is today and then figure out what that potential customer is and then understand that market completely. Let me give you a perfect example. I took over a company at one point and they said, we've identified 16,000 possible customers in this segment. And we wrote up a plan and said, okay, we need 5 salespeople and this, that, the other thing. And then analyzing it a little further, it was like, wait, of the 16,000, the top 6,000, which is really where our product was aimed at, were owned by 600 companies. So on average, the companies actually own 10 of the potential customers in that segment that mapped to us. Well, all of a sudden, we only need 2 salespeople, and the sales cycle was longer than we expected, and we didn't even have the right salespeople, right? And so that was a big lesson. That was a big lesson. So figure out your sweet spot, what it costs to go after that market.
I always like to get to a takeaway that somebody who's listening can use right away to make an impact on their business. And you just gave us a good one, which is know who you're selling to and what you're selling to them, and make sure it's a very, very good fit. And it's going to work on the time frame and scale that you need it to get your business where you want it to get.
Yeah. What kills a lot of small companies is we can get this big deal. All we have to do is add these 3 features. So let me disrupt the engineering team from what they're already doing and add these 3 features. And that's a tough thing to say no to. It really is. But you really have to stay focused on what you're trying to do. And sometimes you have to walk away from deals that are not going to be right.
There's some really important things here that you're saying. I want to make sure everybody hears this, because I've seen this too in a lot of companies, and I've been a victim of this myself. Created my own issues around this.
Yeah.
But it's so important to understand where you're going, where you need to get.
Well, there's another side of that coin. Sometimes you do want to take advantage of some of those opportunities, right? And I don't think there's really a way to quantify exactly when you should and shouldn't. I've never been able to figure it out. Sometimes it is worth changing your engineering schedule. But I would say if you have to change that 2 or 3 times a year, there's something wrong with what you're doing. That's a once every couple of years kind of thing. It really has to be an opportunity that doesn't essentially fix the company on one customer, because no matter what you're being told, we just need these 3 features. That's before they become a customer. The second they become a customer, if they're already asking for 3 features, they're going to ask for 30 features. And then your engineering team is going to be on the hamster wheel attempting to satisfy this one client while you ignore your other clients. Keyword is clients, right? Because you've got risk spread out with other clients. One big client you have a huge amount of risk in, and they know that.
Yeah. So then your client is basically running your organization.
Right. I was involved in a company once. 50% of its revenue came from one client. 95% of the time went to that one client, though.
Hmm.
I mean, it was very difficult to, every day there was a new request for something. And of course, you didn't want to say no. They were profitable.
One of the biggest challenges I'm I'm picking up from you is just context. So if I'm an expert in something and I've been running a business for a little while, that's what I know. That's
Yeah.
my context. So how do you get that education so you can
Hmm.
weave your way through these very complex situations?
Um,
A lot of it depends here. What I'm
yeah,
hearing.
well, so that's a great point. Look, I think if there's one thing that's really important that I've learned, there's not like a rule book somewhere you can go to and get the answer. Sometimes, because every situation is different, it's really something you have to develop for yourself. And it's literally weighing out how you're going to approach things and the pluses and minuses behind them. I can only say for me how I do it, right? I love chess, and I like to think of things in terms of all the moves that could be involved and all the outcomes that could be involved and weigh them. And I want my team to do that too, right? So I'm not really ever looking for the what so much as I am looking for the why. The why is much more important than the what. In other words, what that outcome is going to be, you need to think through why it's going to be that way. And that's kind of how I try to do it. I don't really have a way of explaining it beyond that, but it's just, that's kind of the whole game for me. I want to think through each piece and what the implications are and why.
So what I'm hearing you get to is some kind of a diagnostic
Yeah,
assessment where you're trying to understand what's really happening. Is
for
this what you
sure.
mean when you say why?
Yep.
Getting to the heart of it.
Yeah, exactly. Once you have that, then you really are going to be able to typically figure out what the right action is going to be to take, right? Often, another thing you brought this up about somebody's got something and the company's sort of floating along and maybe not growing. Um, I don't think a lot of that thinking goes into those companies a lot of times. They tend to be pretty reactive. Um, and even when I've met founders that say, well, I don't know how to do this or that or the other thing, but they don't go look to see who to ask. It's just this sort of, well, we're in this situation or we have what we have. And I sure it would be great if we could do this other thing over here, but I don't really know how to do that. So we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And, and maybe that's a comfort thing. Maybe it's a good enough mentality. I don't know. I just think you have to kind of question what you're doing all the time. And ultimately that's how you move things forward.
So do you think that's more likely than a mindset, or is it just people don't know where the tools are? They don't know who to ask.
No, it's a mindset for sure. At the end of the day, you have to come up with the answers. Whether that means getting advice, asking people, doing whatever, you as the business owner still have to rationalize that information yourself. No one can do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
So for sure, it's a mindset.
Weeds out part of the population of what we're talking about here. So we're talking about businesses that are going to fail, and you don't want to be one of the failures. But if you have a certain mindset you're bringing to it, you're probably going to fail. You have to change that mindset, or be willing to change your mindset.
Yes. And by the way, most businesses fail even with doing it the right way. It's hard. There's not a single company on the original Dow that's still listed on it.
So let's look at how you become one of those successful ones. At least give yourself a chance to be in the pool of companies that succeed. Do you have some stories you can tell about things you've seen where people maybe they didn't know what to do, they didn't get it, but they had the right mindset, they were open, they were trying to figure it out?
For me, my mindset is pretty simple. No matter what, you have to be persistent. That probably is worth more than anything else trait you can bring to the table. All the education, the MBAs, all that stuff, I mean, that's a nice to have. It doesn't matter if you're not persistent. However, there's a critical aspect to being persistent that's different from what people think a lot of times. Being persistent doesn't mean just putting your head down and pushing the rock further. It means being persistent, but also paying attention to what's going on around you, because new information comes in all the time. If you don't read that information and act on that information, you're just being persistent and nothing is going to change, right? It's the old saying about hitting a nail over and over again, right? It doesn't really move anything. So it's really being persistent, paying attention to what's going on. In terms of stories, I mean, there have been a lot of companies I was in that we thought we were dead, like more than 5 times. The biggest company in the space was doing $1 billion, and we were doing like 1.3 million. And the board was sure that we were going to compete with this $1 billion company. And the company was out of money, and it was already 10 years old. And the investors were all small-time angel investors. And, I probably should have passed on this one, but I thought they had something. So they had this product that they were selling that primarily involved networking. I didn't think that was going to be valuable in the long term because, and this is sort of just the critical thinking, one day I'm driving along and I thought, you know what? The price of bandwidth has never gone up for any product in telecom. Watts lines, ATM, you could go on and on. At no time has the price of a telecom product that I could find ever gone up. And so I didn't see that as being a good strategy going forward. However, they had this little ad product that they were essentially giving away. And so, myself and the team, we thought, gosh, we could flip this around and never talk about bandwidth and only talk about monetization. And so I wanted to validate that. And so I went to the board and I said, I want to raise some strategic money. And if we can raise the strategic money, I didn't run the company at the time. I was just a board member. I said, I'll step in and run it. So we were able to do that. We were able to raise some strategic money, super important money, and it really validated what we were talking about. And we turned the company around, and it took 3.5 years, and then we had a really great exit. There's another company, I'll tell you one that didn't work. And even though these are painful, a lot of times, when you win a race, so to speak, you don't really learn as much as when you lose, unfortunately. I guess it's one of life's little paradoxes, right? But I got involved in the company, super nice guys, engineer guys, and they just wanted money to rain down, but didn't want to make any changes that would facilitate this because they had a business where they went in the office every day and got to work on computers, and customers were sort of this afterthought that, it wasn't important to them. And ultimately what happened is, I was there to drive the company forward. And that's what they thought they wanted, but they only wanted that if nothing had to change. So that was not a good fit for me or for them. I did triple the size of the company, but then ultimately it became a situation where we really didn't fit, And so that was an important lesson, right? Sometimes people say something that you want to hear, but it's from their perspective. Mm-hmm. And you really have to ask the questions about why here's this word, why they think they want that. Instead of just having it hit you like, oh, that's what essentially that's what I want, so therefore we must be saying the same thing.
I think this is a really important tip for business owners. It's to ask a few times, ask the question of why is this happening? Tell me more about why you think this is happening. And then ask it again in another way. And then listen really carefully to whoever you're talking to.
Right. Exactly. The reality is if the business is flat, 10 million for 10 years, then that's how they want it. Now, they might be getting tired and say that now they want to sell it, and that's that's fine if that's But it's pretty unlikely that if the business has been flat for 10 years, that you suddenly have this desire to grow it massively and are willing to do what needs to be done. So you have to be honest with yourself about that.
I think that's really important, and that self-honesty sometimes needs to be pushed.
Yeah.
There needs to, and it's not that people have bad intentions. It's just they don't know how to think about it. And
No.
they don't necessarily know themselves what it takes to turn into a revenue machine, as opposed to a great product company.
Yeah. I literally, for WorksMachine, I ask point blank, how tired are you? People are honest. If you ask them that point blank, it's just sometimes you have to ask what's probably already self-evident, right? Just to have that validation from the other side.
I have a lot of these conversations, and what I really like about the approach that you're taking is it's fairly straightforward. There's not a lot of complex methodologies behind what you're saying here. It's understand where you're at and what you want, and get a sense for yourself of what you're willing to do. Are you willing to do what it takes?
Yeah. The complexity, Larry, that's a great point. The complexity is that people are complex, right? Communication, even when people think they're being completely straightforward, is not necessarily straightforward. Yeah, the complexity is people, and that's Henry Ford had a saying. How come every time I want two good hands, I get a whole man? And so you really have to think about that, because you're always dealing with people ultimately, right? A company is just that. It's a group of people. And everybody has their pluses and minuses and ways they need to work together. And those things are kind of what you really have to think about and manage to build an environment around.
So those basic elements to be successful as a business owner are in some ways fairly simple to understand. What's difficult is dealing with them in
Correct.
the context of a group of people. So you got to understand what you want and where you're going, and you got to ask a lot of questions about why are certain things happening versus other things and other things.
Yep.
And you have to be persistent in a way where you're paying attention.
Correct.
To what other people are telling you.
That is it. Exactly.
So if you do those things, you still may not win because it's hard. But
right.
But at least you got a shot. Now you're controlling your destiny.
Right. That's why I'm not a believer in here's the book on how to build a SaaS business. I'm sure there's probably some things you can get out of that. Don't get me wrong. But if it was as simple as putting it in a book, writing it down, everybody would read that book. And it just doesn't work that way. I've got a saying, which is, whatever yesterday was is gone, and we don't know what tomorrow is going to be. And it's kind of like, that's the shifting sands of business, right? We're dealing with what we have today. That's really what it boils down to.
That's great. Rob, if someone is in the mindset where, they're getting this, it makes sense to them, they want to do something, how can you help them?
Well, okay, great question. Maybe I can't. I can tell pretty quickly if I can or can't, right? But I can help with everything from, really starting back with, let me back it up. We build a whole assessment framework, right? And another little saying I have, you can walk around the house 5 times, but until you're inside, you don't really know what it's like, right? So just looking at financials and product, it doesn't really tell you everything, right? So we build an assessment framework that helps us evaluate where a company's at. And it's pretty extensive. It's not due diligence, but it's really, what do you really have, right? Including things like, where are you at in the marketplace? Where are your competitors? Are you behind, ahead, too far behind? Things like that, right? And that really is what can help clarify where a company is and help identify what those next steps might be. And the next step for us could be anything from looking at product decisions, to building out a funding plan, to building out an exit plan. And we're not an investment bank, so we don't rep companies to the market. But the sort of simple explanation is, if an investment bank's a car lot, we're the detail shop you take your car to before you put it on the lot. Now, having said that, everybody thinks usually their company's all buttoned up and in great shape, and that's pretty rare. To be gentle about it. And almost certainly there's extra value that somebody could build into their business. And it might even, and that's usually something that takes 12 to 18 months. If you're trying to maximize your outcome, it's pretty rare that, for example, me, I could help somebody for a month and then it's done. It's usually a process over a few months.
So if somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the easiest way to find you?
They can email me at Rob, R-O-B, at WorksMachine, WorksMachine.com, or simply call 425-246-2599.
Thanks very much, Rob. My contact information is up on the screen. Feel free to reach out. Any final thoughts? Or
I'm happy to talk to any B2B tech company. One last thing I'll say is I don't go to school on anybody as an advisor. So if you're in an area I'm not familiar with, and I'll pass on that. I mean, I want to help companies that are in areas I'm already familiar with, and I'm happy to talk to anybody that has an interest.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it very much.